You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. The United States Constitution calls for a census of the nation every 10 years. The first was taken in 1790 when the population was just 3.9 million people. For a century and a half, a small army of census takers went door to door, not only counting people, but at different times the number of people who could read and write, the number of newspapers in a community, and the types of fruits grown in the orchards. This vast reservoir of data has always been used by government for apportioning representation in Congress, and in more recent years for apportioning federal funds. It is also used by business for planning purposes and by sociologists, historians, and political scientists, and genealogists. This year, 2000, the United States will conduct its 22nd census. To discuss the process and its role in Greater Cincinnati, I am joined this morning by Cynthia King, the Ohio team leader for the Cincinnati Local Census Office. Joining her is Steve Sievers from the Hamilton County Regional Planning Office. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Steve, why is this so important? Why is filling out these forms? What does this really impact? I mean, I said the basic things, but what does it really impact?
Well, that's a common question I think that everybody has, and our goal is to try to make people realize what it does mean. And for us, in a planning department, it means the nuts and bolts of any data that we use to plan schools, to plan community facilities, parks. This is the fundamental source of information. In recent years, it's become a more capped resource for government funding and for allocating government funds. And so we've also tried to piggyback that onto all our messages, and that it breaks down to almost $450 a year per household. And so every one of those that's missed, that money adds up for our local governments, our schools, et cetera. So there's a couple different reasons. Those are the two that we've...
Yeah, so from a federal funding point of view, as I understand it, about $150 billion, count that B, gets appropriated every year by the federal government based on census data. So, as you're saying, you miss that, money that we've paid in taxes doesn't get properly sent back here.
That's exactly correct.
Or, as we've talked on this show many times, as you plan mass transit or as you plan new subdivisions, if you don't have accurate data, you don't have good planning data, right?
That's correct.
Cynthia, how's this going to happen this year? 2000's a long time. When's this going to happen?
We actually will start sending our forms out in the middle of March. Every household is supposed to receive their form by March 16th.
Now, let's be clear. In the old days, in the way I set this up, you literally had census takers walking down the street, knocking on a door. Now, it's being done by mail primarily. Is that correct?
Exactly. In fact, that is our #1 goal for Census 2000, is to increase our mail-back response rate.
Okay.
It is the least expensive way to conduct the census, and since this is our taxpayers' money, we want to try and save as much as we can.
So by March 16th, everybody should be receiving something in the mail?
Yes, they should, and in the Cincinnati area, that form should be delivered through the mail. Now, when you live in a more rural area, there's a chance that you would be hand-delivered your form, and that's another process. But by March 16th, every household should receive their form. And we have set a date, which is April 1st, which is what we call the official Census Day, that we would like to have every one of those forms turned back into the Census Bureau.
Okay. And what happens if I get my form, and I haven't heard Steve tell me how important all of this is,
Right.
and I lay it aside in my pile, which I do all the time,
Exactly.
and it gets lost? How are you going to know I didn't send mine in? Or I look at my form and said, I don't want them to know that, and I leave a blank. What happens?
Well, at that point, each one of our forms are geocoded, and that tells the Census Bureau where the form came from, what household it projects a geographical location. So what happens if you do not turn that form in, we then have to send an enumerator out to your home to collect that information. And that's where the real cost of the census comes in. So I'm hoping that with the promotional campaign that we're doing at the national level, as well as what we're doing here locally, that people will understand the extreme importance of filling out that form, and that they will send it back into the Bureau as quickly as possible, and also to avoid having a census taker come to their home. The longer they wait, the more it increases the opportunity that we will have to come out and try and look for that information.
There's actually two forms here, right?
Yes, there are.
There's most people, as I understand it, about 80+% are going to fill out what's called the short form.
Exactly.
You know, let's not talk about IRS, I guess. But okay, it's the short form. And you know, how easy is that to fill out?
It's actually very easy. In fact, it's the shortest form that we've had in the history of using both the short and the long form. It only has 7 questions, and it should take the average person only about 10 minutes to fill out. So we're extremely excited about that. Every decennial census, the Census Bureau goes to great lengths to monitor and make sure that each of the questions that we ask are appropriate for the collection that is needed. And so the changes that we
And on that short form, the basic questions are name, age,
race, exactly. Are you have Hispanic origin? Do you own or rent your home?
Okay.
Are you male or female? So it's pretty basic stuff. In fact,
is that for each person in the house?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And the form allows you to respond for up to 6 members of the household.
Okay. Steve, there's also a long form, which isn't just a 10-minute fill out. What's that?
Well, it's a long form, and to put it bluntly, it has a lot of the questions I think Cynthia is alluding to, as people might be a little more hesitant to respond to. The questions that get into maybe your income or your occupation, how long it takes you to get to work. Unfortunately, that's the one that we have the largest amount of unresponse, but it's also the most informative for people in planning and for any sort of economic agency, for businesses that use this information, because it really begins to tell them what their market is in a certain area.
Let me give a couple of examples here. We've got a couple of examples from that long form. I want to put one of them up here. Here's we got one. It's question number 17 from the long form. Because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition lasting 6 months or more, does this person, whoever is being referred to, have any difficulty in doing any of the following activities? Learning, remembering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why does the census, why does the government want to know that?
Well, specifically because it's used for a federal program, and every question on the census form is used to divvy out money or used for a specific act of Congress to satisfy those requirements. We've been telling people this isn't a Gallup poll survey and that they just don't throw any question out there, how many times you go to the drugstore week or something like that for basic information. It's asked for a fundamental purpose. A question like that, for example, is getting into locally, like the MRDD, disabled organizations might be able to use that to target where they put their activities and where they focus.
So people with disabilities, and that may also apply for senior citizens,
correct,
right?
Exactly. You know, and I think that most people don't understand the importance of the answers to these questions. For example, in a metropolitan area like Cincinnati, it is extremely important for us to make sure that we're providing the necessary transportation services for our disabled individuals. So answering this question then allows us to predict what future needs of the disabled will be. So I think it's extremely important in a community service to make sure that we're providing those services to our public.
Let me throw up one more. There was one other question off the long form that I thought was kind of interesting to look at. This is question number 40. Do you have complete kitchen facilities in this house, apartment, or mobile home? That is a sink with piped water, a range or stove, and a refrigerator. Okay, what's that for?
You know what, that's a great question. I love that question because the answer is so extremely important to make sure that the federal government, state, and local governments are aware of what the housing situations are in their areas, especially when we're looking at low-income families, single women with children. It's very important that our children are being raised in what we consider suitable housing. And so that question has a tremendous impact on the Fair Housing Act and making sure that there's equality in the type of living standards that we are providing for our public.
You know, one of the things I want to say, and I'm speaking now as a historian who uses the census all the time, I want to make clear to people that those sorts of questions aren't brand new.
No,
asking those kinds of questions, what do you grow in your orchard, how many cows you got versus pigs, when you have indoor plumbing, the questions have changed every 10 years. But the census has always included asking that type of question. It's just the specific questions have changed over time. So it's not like, gee, in the year 2000, suddenly the government wants to know all these things that are different than any other time.
Exactly. And I think that if people had a better understanding on how governments run. And I have to admit, before I started working for the Bureau and using demographic information myself, I didn't have, I think, a clear understanding of how it worked. I just assumed because I paid my taxes that there were certain services that I should demand and that should be provided for our community. But it's these specific questions and the answers to those questions that provide our governments the ability to know where to place new roads, what type of services are needed, whether you need a community center for the elderly, et cetera.
Steve, how many people, percentage-wise, will get to fill out the long form?
The estimations are about 1 out of every 6 households, so 83, 84%. And in our area, it's probably going to be a little bit higher because the short form or the long form is a sample. And where you have a smaller population
So 1 out of
base,
6 for the long form.
Correct.
So that's what, 17% or go ahead.
Right, right. In our area, since that's a sample, we have a larger base, so that number will probably be actually a little bit lower. In a rural area, that might be up over 20% because they need to build a base of.
How do I get to fill out that form? I was so disappointed last time that I got that lousy little short form. Do I have any control over that? Can I answer all those questions?
It's all random.
It's all random.
It's all random. And there's people that get the long form that would like to switch with you, I think,
Oh,
as
I know.
well.
We wish everyone thought the way you did.
Yeah,
Really.
I mean, and as somebody who's used that census data for the past, one of the things is about security. People were very worried, and
Yes.
in the age of computers, and by the way, something, again, from a historical point of view, in the 1880s, the Census Department developed punch cards, which was the precursor, and in 1951, the Census Bureau was the first non-military organization to use
that.
computers.
That's true.
So now, in computers, with computers today, what about privacy? What happens to this information?
It is kept completely confidential
How do
for
I know that?
72 years because we have one of the most amazing records of keeping that confidentiality throughout history, and I challenge anyone to challenge that. We go to...
But have things changed with modern computers and hackers and all that kind of stuff?
It has not been a problem. We don't foresee it being a problem in the future. We go to great lengths to make sure that that information stays private. We do not share it with any other government agency. Even the President of the United States does not receive this information. Only after 72 years did this information become public, and we have a strong record of keeping that confidentiality.
Now let's be clear about what information becomes public in 72 years and what, because if you want to be a planner, you're working as a planner, you can't wait 72 years for this information. What becomes public soon and what gets held private for 72 years?
Well, the information that we'll be getting hopefully by the middle of 2001, which is going to be several months before what it was in 1990 because of computers, they're making it much quicker, that process. All the data that's put in that's on the form will be released in aggregate format. So in other words, you're not going to be able to go in and find out what a particular person made. It's grouped together and put out for an area. And what we call that is like a block group.
Okay.
Is the lowest level of geography that a lot of those detailed questions get to. The most detailed is a block, and that's just basically number of people and some basic statistics. But because some blocks are very small, they don't allow the more detailed information to be released. And to give you an idea, a block group is usually between 600 and 3,000 people.
So this is aggregate data.
Correct.
Trends, patterns. And by the way, again, the Census Bureau over the years has published some of the most beautiful graphs and maps to display that. So, but then the individual things that I fill out on my form, short or long, that you can't get to that as a planner.
No.
No, in fact, an example of what Steve is just saying, and it's frustrating to some planners because when you're in a community that is very rural, very small, information is not available at all for that block group if the potential that the information could be tied to any one individual. So we don't even release that. So, you know, that I think stands to show that we go to great lengths to protect your privacy.
A couple of quick things. There was a controversy earlier that the census, because it missed a lot of people in 1980. In fact, the argument is that the 1980 census was the first time the census was less, it wasn't better than the one before it for the first time. There was a suggestion that we do the census by sampling, and that got struck down by the Supreme Court. What's that all about, and can we find all these people?
Well, it was a major issue, and I think one thing it's done is help to raise awareness about the census. So it's been kind of a positive in that light. Exactly, promotional, subliminal. But what it's saying is that for apportionment in House of Representatives, we cannot use sampling. It's kind of left the door open for sampling in other areas, for redistricting within a state. A lot of states right now are debating this in their state legislatures, whether or not they'll be allowed to do this. And what we've been told is that we might have two numbers for each community. you have a 100% count and then a sample count. That's what we've been told at this time, but I think the Bureau is still trying to figure out which way they're going with that issue. So it'll be interesting how it
I have less than a minute.
Okay.
What about positions? In order to get this done, my understanding is you need employees, and tell me very quickly how many and what are they going to make, and then we'll put a number up.
For Hamilton County, we will recruit over 14,000 individuals.
14,000?
Yes, it's absolutely amazing. We will assemble over 2.8 million across the country. This is the largest operation that the federal government takes on.
And what's the pay range?
For Cincinnati, it will range from $9 to $13, and that will be adjusted for the Hamilton County area outside of the city limits. But it's a great paying job.
And if you're interested in one of those jobs, you can call 381-5907 or 1-888-325-7733. Listen, thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Good luck, and gather that information for us historians.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. On October the 11th, 1999, the world welcomed its 6 billionth inhabitant, a boy born in Bosnia. What are the implications for the world, for the United States? Welcome back. The 2000 U.S. Census will clarify the population trends in this country, but as a developed post-industrial nation, the significance of our demographic trends can be fully understood only in a larger world context. Some basic figures. From the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, it took until 1825 for the world to hit 1 billion inhabitants. The 2 billion mark was passed about a century later in 1930. And the 3 billion mark, about 25 years later, in 1954. In the last 45 years, the curve has soared with the birth of the symbolic 6 billionth child, a little boy we saw going into the break. That was hailed in October 1999. And the demographers project another doubling of the population over the next century before it plateaus. Several months ago, Werner Fornos, the president of the Population Institute, visited Cincinnati. The Population Institute was founded in 1969 by the United Methodist Church and is headquartered in Washington, D.C. I discussed world population growth with Mr. Fornos. We began by talking about Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, in 1968. Ehrlich's projection of 7 to 7.5 billion by 2000 set off the effort for zero population growth movement. I began by asking Mr. Fornos where things stood in 1999.
Well, there's good news and bad news. We actually are seeing a drop in the world growth rate, and that's mostly in the affluent countries. But the world this year will top 6 billion. Last year we added 78 million, and 98% of that growth then was in the poorest countries of the world, those that are already terribly torn by civil strife and social unrest, and where many people live in brutal poverty. So even though we're at 6 billion now, that's less than what was predicted was going to be at the end of the century. Last year, we reported that 74 countries were going to double in the next 30 years. Our report this year showed that it's going to be 65 countries doubling in 30 years. And I said, wow, they've really gotten their population under control. The problem with those 9 countries was they were dying faster than anyone had ever anticipated as a result of parasitic and infectious diseases, and the leading cause being HIV/AIDS. And so, yes, we are slowing down the growth rate, but I think we're slowing it down with the wrong measures.
You talk about these extreme population problems in very poor countries, third world countries. You know, from our perspective, it seems very logical that those would be the countries, those would be the societies that would want to limit population growth. Obviously, they see it different. Why? What is it in their logic? How do they see the world that causes them to continue to have more and more children?
This will surprise you, because it's not that they don't want to limit their family size. Even the most illiterate amongst us would love to have only the number of children that they can love and take care of, but they lack the resources to do so. They don't have the knowledge. If they have never been inside of a classroom, and if they're totally male-dominated, how in the world are they going to get grips on their own fertility? And so the lack of resources availability, especially in the 5 countries where 50% of the world's population growth today occurs: India, China, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Nigeria. The problem is that in Pakistan, which is on a course to double, their population to a rate where even by the year 2050, they'll be very close to the same size as the U.S. population will be at that time. You have a lot of male domination of society. You have a lot of veils and a lot of religious feelings that men are the prime object of the family. And it's been very difficult in Pakistan to introduce any kind of voluntary regulation of fertility. Nigeria, where you still have polygamy rampant, the Quran says that a man may have up to 5 wives if he can take care of them. And many men forget that that admonition is in there, that if he can take care of them. But so it's not at all surprising for me to talk to political leaders in Nigeria that have 20 children. So there are cultural problems, there are religious problems, but the biggest problem is the lack of resources. There are at least 12 countries in Western Africa where female enrollment in school is less than 5%. And so if we want to really solve the population problem, we need to talk to these people about eradication of illiteracy, getting girls into school, because wherever a girl has achieved an 8th grade education, she has half the number of children than her uneducated sister.
One of the countries you mentioned was China. My understanding is that in China there is a one-child per family policy and a penalty, a financial penalty, if you have more than one child. How effective has that been?
It continues to grow. It has last year an increase of 21 million people. It is now at 1.3 billion people. Their survival depends upon them achieving a destiny of about 800 million people. And in order to do that, what they have pursued is a one-child family policy. There is no one that is forced to have only one child, and they're relaxing that one-child policy because of the tremendous criticism that they have gotten from the United States and not so much in Europe, but the prime criticism on the one-child policy has come out of conservative circles in the United States. And as I said, I'm a firm believer in human rights, but more importantly, in this area, human rights need to be respected. Now, China this year has instituted a 32-county demonstration project to see whether they can use Western voluntarism of reproductive health care from the age of puberty to beyond menopause, instituting in these 32 counties a model to see whether through education, through information, and through the provision of prenatal care and postnatal care, mammograms, pap smears, all things that are very strange to the Chinese society, that they can encourage couples to limit themselves to a one-child family. But they've dropped in these 32 counties the quota system, and so if people have 2 children, they're not going to get punished for it.
You're describing this tremendous population growth in third world countries particularly, and the implication it has for their societies. But in the moderate run, let's say the next 20 or 30 years, if these trends continue, what's the implication for Americans? Does it really make any difference for us?
We need markets, and that's one thing. And empty pockets can't buy American goods. And as these huge labor pools open up around the world, American industry is moving manufacturing facilities overseas. And that affects American wage earners.
But what about abortion? How does abortion fit into all of this? Is that a population control measure?
And we don't think abortion is a method of family planning. Abortion is like any other crisis we have, a failure of society to come to grips with a much more fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem in this case is preventing unintended pregnancies. In Georgia, in the Republic of Georgia, in 1989, they had 180,000 abortions. Less than 5% of couples knew anything about contraception or knew where to get a safe contraceptive. Even condoms were rotting, those that they got. And, you know, you're playing Russian roulette when you use faulty condoms. Today, some 50% of women in Georgia are using modern contraceptives donated by the industrialized world, and we're seeing abortion down to less than 20,000. So, you know, I don't understand when our politicians are going to understand the correlation between preventative health care and getting away from those things that many in our society find violative of their religious rights.
I know over the years, some third world nations have seen the effort to control population growth as just a new form of cultural imperialism by first world countries, European, Western countries. What's your response to that?
In 1970, when I made my first population speech, I was invited to address the first population conference in Ghana. And they wanted to know what are Americans doing about this, and the reason for that was they felt that this was some sort of genocide plot on the part of the U.S., and certainly the Soviet propaganda machine fed that throughout Africa as we struggled for the African continent, whether they would become allies of the democracies or of the dangerous empire. When I went, I was booed out of the hall as a genocidist, as a new form of imperialism. They viewed America's commitment to helping people improve their family life as a way of making sure that the resources of Africa would be reserved for use by the affluent United States and to propel our affluence even further. In 1983, I was invited to Arusha for the second population conference, and I received a major award from the same people who booed me. And I said to President Daniel Arap Moi of Kenya, what's different than when we spoke in Ghana? He says, everything that you said has come true. And we are eating up our resources by population. We're not able to achieve our aspirations in economic development. We're not able to achieve our aspirations in social development.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. We leave you this morning with two views of the United States Census from 1940 newsreels. One is vintage Bob Hope, the other the serious bureaucratic perspective.
Wait a minute, wait. I'm here to take the census. What's your names?
This is Brenda, and this is Copina.
Brenda and Cabina, huh?
Now, I want to ask you a question.
What is that?
Are you married?
No.
Okay.